Hello, everybody. Welcome to our January 2025 edition of the Pigment 101 webinar. We're so glad to have you here and glad that you could find the time to join us. So today we are going to go and revisit a subject I did in June of 2021, way back during the pandemic times. But I've got a lot of updates to it and some additional examples for you so that you as formulators and users of pigments can understand the impacts of that, the finishing choices that are selected for that particular pigment product, the impact that it will have on its color as well as its technical performances. So as I've done in the past, this webinar will be recorded, and all of those in attendance will get the link to the recording that you can share with your teams, as well as the PDF of the presentation. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the chat box. I'll address them all at the end of the presentation. So with that, we will go ahead and get started with the presentation. I'm going to go off screen here a bit and go ahead. So again, we are taking a look at the impact of the finishing steps. So this is one that you've seen many times in our webinars, but it's very important to continue to understand the impact of the chemistry. So the chemistry itself will provide about 75% of the performance of the particular pigment. It doesn't matter who makes it or where it comes from. It is really truly the chemistry that provides the majority of the performance. The remaining performance is achieved by the choice of finishing techniques that are used for that particular pigment product. Every pigment product is developed so that the end application for which it was designed is optimized as best as possible. So choices are in both the mechanical area as well as the chemical area. And I'll show you some examples of where those come in the next slides. So as I mentioned, the impact, the finishing steps chosen for the product are designed for the end application for which the pigment was designed for. So as Sudarshan, we develop pigments for plastics, coatings, and inks. And each of those have a very specific need for the pigment going into that dispersion process. For example, the plastics areas have a very short and less intense residence time for dispersing the pigment. So those particular pigments need to be as small as possible and as soft as possible to optimize that, formulate that dispersion process. Coatings and inks are very similar in that there are many sub-applications for each of those. Water, solvent, decorative, and all types of various unique sub-applications. And so again, those finishing techniques that are selected are optimized for those very end application areas. And as you've heard me say many times, it's not necessarily that these other pigments won't work across the application areas. Just need to make sure that we select the best pigment for your application area. And of course, that's my job to help you do that. So there are, as I mentioned, there are two places, two types, both chemical and mechanical. In the chemical area, the first place that these can occur is right after the crystal is developed in the reactor. So there are surface treatments that are used, other additives that could be added at that particular point in the product development and product process. And then The other place for chemical is at the very end step where the individual batches of pigment are blended to the final lot. It is at that location where some additional chemical additives could be used for that particular product. On the mechanical side, there are many choices of the types of dryers that are selected, and as well as milling. Dryers are selected based on how hard or dense or tight the agglomerates are created. And of course, the type of milling that is used really goes to what kind of a particle size do we need, as well as that distribution of particle size. So there are many choices, and it's the combination of all of these selection processes that dictate the outcome of that particular product in whatever application that it goes into. So just to get an idea, going back to this one comparison from an application perspective, some information that you can glean from the TDS document for a particular color index pigment are such things as specific gravity and surface area. Particle size sometimes shows up there. Oil absorption is another area that shows up. And these are all indications of how that particular product was created. If you'll notice, as I mentioned earlier, for a plastic applications, which we try to achieve a softer, smaller particles, pigment particle to be able to match the short and less intense residence time of a plastic process. Coatings and inks, they can tolerate more because their dispersion processes tend to be much more intense and much more longer residence times for those dispersion activities to occur. On the effect pigment side, of course, there's both mechanical and chemical finishing steps selected for those as well. The grinding of the mica and the classification of the mica are mechanical areas where we can direct the amount of sparkle and the amount of color travel that is used for that particular product. On the chemical side, we have the option of adding surface treatments to those particular uh, products. So what the chemistry is, what the amount that we put on, those are all choices based on the end application area. So with this updated version of this topic, I went through and pulled a number of examples in all of the application areas. So I'll try to get through them during this time period. If there's something specific that you might be interested in, just shoot me a note and I can pull something up. There was a lot more that I came across that I could not fit into this particular webinar. So we do have a lot of examples. So we'll start off in the coatings area. I've got examples for both powder coating and liquid coatings. So in powder coatings, we took a look at Pigment Blue 15.3. And in this example shows an example from both the ink coatings and plastics areas. Again, these were where the individual product itself was developed for the work. It's just a matter, there'll be some differences that come out of these particular products. And there might be something there that could be useful to you as a formulator. So in this particular example here, we're taking a look at the deep tint tone color values. Here, deep tint tone is a 1-to-1 ratio with the TiO2. So we see that this particular 15.3 for the ink application area has a different color position than the other two in coatings and plastics. If we take a look at the strength development in this particular formulation, here we're taking a look at the L value in the tint tone formulation. And here we see that ink product development does have a higher L value or a lower strength than the other two. And primarily this comes from that lower oil absorption that results in less interaction with this particular formulation. It also has a lower surface area, which suggests that there is a higher particle size in that particular product. From a performance perspective, if we take a look at the overbake stability of these ones, Pigment Blue 15.3 is a very good pigment. It can withstand a lot. However, again, going back to the choices that are used in the finishing, we also see that there starts to be some differences in that overbake stability, especially when there's a lot of TiO2 present in that coatings formulation. So we see that ink formulation being more deficient for overbake stability than the plastic or the coating formulation. And then lastly, in impact resistant, we start to see some even more differences between the three application areas. Both in the direct and in the reverse, the ink formulation developed product does have a lesser performance in this particular testing. However, we also now start to see some differences between the plastic and the coatings formulation. Once you get to the reverse side, the coatings developed product falls off in performance levels over the plastic side. Shifting gears to Pigment Yellow 110 in powder coating, here we are taking a look at the impact of the particle size. Pigment Yellow 110 is one of those color indexes that does show up with various particle size, both transparent and opaque versions for this particular chemistry. Now, in powder coating, the transparent version is rarely used. However, it's always good to understand what the impact of that particle size can have. So in this particular case, these two examples, we see that the diameter is about half of the transparent versus the opaque, and the surface area is about double, which kind of goes hand in hand with the two properties. Now, how does that impact the performance? Mainly, we see this when we take a look at gloss with respect to mass tone. So in this particular case, because it is transparent, it's going to require more of a film build to be able to get to those hiding levels, to be able to be a truly mass tone type of a product, and that then impacts the surface gloss in there. So we see the transparent one with the finer particle size being lower in gloss. The other formulations are about the same. The other performance area, again, in that mass tone area, is in the pellet flow. All those smaller particles fall more tightly in the formulation, and it doesn't allow it to flow as well as the larger particle size on the opaque side. If we shift over to the liquid coating side, we're going back to the Pigment Blue 15.3. Here we have other examples from the three application areas to take a look at. Again, we're looking at the deep tint tone color perspective for this particular beta CPC blue. And in this deep tint tone formulation, we see a number of color spaces for these particular products. Again, all of these finishing techniques chosen do shift the color in different ways. Tint tone, same idea here, although they're a little bit less in terms of a spread, but the same idea with respect to the amount of color that you can achieve from the different application areas. The other interesting thing is because this type of chemistry is transparent, so we start to see a lot more uses with effect pigments. So this particular formulation is a metallic formulation, so it's always nice to see how much color travel you can get from various application pigment products in this type of formulation. So we see in this particular case, the bulk of these products do have a very, very similar green to red travel. However, there is one product that was developed on the ink side that has more green to red travel, and then the one product that was developed on the plastic side has less green to red travel. So those are some another aspect of color formulations to keep in mind when selecting the particular pigment product for your formulation. So I mentioned there were numerous drawing choices to be selected for pigment products. So in one area, this study takes a look at two of those types for an alpha blue 15-2 product, and where we're comparing two different types of drawing processes. And this slide takes a look at that deep tint toned color formulation, the impact of the choice of dryer, all else being equal, can have on the development of color. So in this example, we see that the drying process 2 can develop a redder because it's an alpha one, so we want to move it as far red as possible, and a little bit bluer process in there. And then the L value is also on the darker side to be able to get you more strength. And that's all because that drying process number 2 results in a smaller particle size and a more narrow particle size distribution. On the tint side, we see the same example from the color positioning, but more importantly, we see the impact on the amount of strength that's developed with drying process 2 over drying process number 1. If we stick with the one drawing process and then take a look at the formulations going in that particular product goes into, we see some very interesting things that also have to be considered when you're evaluating pigments. So this is the exact same product, exact same drawing process number 2, but here we have three different coatings formulations. We have an alkylamine that's typically used in very industrial type formulations, a solvent-based polyurethane, as well as a water-based polyurethanes. That those are typically used in more of the automotive type formulations. And again, here we take a look at that deep tint tone 1-to-1 ratio with TiO2, and we see very different color positionings for these same exact pigment, but in different formulations as well. So it's important to understand that when we're taking a look at how these products are used in the end application area. Because keep in mind, when we QC a product, it's in a formulation. Obviously, we don't have the ability to QC in many, many different formulations. So we choose a formulation that we believe is the appropriate formulation for the QC process. And then everything is measured against that standard in that formulation. But the resulting aspect in the end customer formulation could be very different depending on what that formulation is. On the tint side, same idea here, although we see less of a difference in the two polyurethane formulations versus the alkylamine, but more importantly, we see a strength difference between all of these formulations as well. If we shift gears now over to inks, I've got a number of examples in a variety of formulation types to share with you. So if we start with solvent-based ink, here we take a look at Pigment Red 48-2, which this happens to be the calcium laked version of this particular chemistry. We have four products here that are three. All four are also all used in recommended for plastics, but one is also recommended for both plastics and inks. And we start to see some very different color positionings as we've seen in other chemistries as well. This is the full tone color position. The amount of strength that is developed in this particular solvent-based formulation can also be seen differently. So we see a higher L value, which indicates a less amount of strength development in this formulation across the board for this one product that is both used in inks and plastics. And then the converse is true as well. We see one of the plastics grades develops a very strong strength value in this formulation. Viscosity is always also a key factor in ink formulations, and we see a variety of resulting viscosity based on the finishing aspects on each of these particular products. And then, of course, gloss is another area that's important to take a look at. And we, again, as we see a variety of resulting 60-degree gloss values, depending on the chosen finishing steps that are used for that particular product. Moving over to a UV offset for ink formulation, we're taking a look at four different products of Pigment Yellow 13. So these are the same formulation, all ink formulations, but three different products. And here we're taking as another example of particle size in this formulation. So this, our standard, which is our 197D, is our most transparent. It's going to have the smallest particle size. The other three are more opaque, and that shows up in a couple of areas, especially in this strength, which we've seen in other chemistries and other application areas already. The most opaque version has the is very uh, is lower in strength. It also does have an impact on the yield value. The most opaque provides the lowest yield value of the set. And you can get a feel for that opacity in this chart here, where the 170 or 197D is the most transparent of the set, and conversely, the 169 is the most opaque of the particular set. From a color position, that particle size difference shows up in the greenness of the pigment. Because it's a smaller particle size, the 197 is going to be the most green of the set, and the 169, because it's the largest particle size, the more opaque, it's going to be resulting in the most red of the set. Hard to see in the visuals. These are all against that transparent 197D in there, so it's easier to see from the color data itself. And then lastly, on the ink side, I have some examples with regards to green 7 in a water-based ink formulation. So here we have a number of green 7 products, both all from all application areas, the plastics, coatings, and inks. And we start to see a little bit of opacity difference based really on from a visual perspective. And you can start to see where we start to get some products offer more opacity, and some are more transparent than others in this particular formulation. From a color, or I'm sorry, from a gloss and viscosity perspective, the grouping is a little bit more narrow in for this particular formulation. but there are choices to be made if this is or if these are formulations or if your formulations require something very specific in this area. More impact is in the color space for each of these areas. Again, that goes partly towards how the pigment is efficiently dispersed in that formulation and how much color is developed in there. So typically we see much more variation in the amount of greenness developed, which is an indication of how well it gets dispersed. The more green developed, the better it gets dispersed. And then strength is always a key issue to be able to develop to formulate for. The development also the pigment choices that are made can also impact that strength development, as can be seen in this particular chart. Okay, and then lastly, the last pigment or last application area is in plastics. I have a few examples here as well. We talked in several of the other application areas about the formulation that the pigment is going into. Here's another example on the plastic side. So bleeding is one of those properties that is evaluated for pigments with respect to plastics. It's important to be able to understand how it fits within that formulation. So we have two examples of pigment violet 23 and bleeding in an LDPE formulation. These two products behave very similarly with very little bleed. However, if you switch these two same pigments over into a PVC formulation, we start to see differences between the two, where one does have much more bleed than the other. So it's very important to understand where the product is going in terms of the end application and the choice of the product. It all goes back to that prioritization of your properties that's required for your formulations. And I've always termed those as your must wants and nice to haves in there. So you're not going to be able to get everything, but you want to make sure that you get the most important properties out of your formulation. And shifting back to the Pigment Blue 15-3, from a color perspective in plastics, we see again a lot of varieties uh, of color that you can achieve in a plastic formulation using products from different application areas. So the choice is yours to be able to get that. The interesting thing to look at is that there are a lot of choices, and so pigment uh, 15 blue 15-3 is a beta, so it's naturally going to be to the green side. But within that chemistry, we can shift them from more red to very, very green in there, depending on where it comes from. Tintone, you start to see the same type of uh, as, uh, uh, aspect for color position in terms of the where it sits in that tint tone formulation. The values of the bubbles indicate the strength or the L value of that tint tone formulation. From a performance aspect, filter pressure value is one of those very important ones that give an indication of how easily that particular pigment is dispersed in that formulation. So the main chart here shows those particular products and how well they disperse or how low the FPV value is for this aspect of it. And one of the things that we look at as a pigment manufacturer is pigments that do have a filter pressure value of 2 bars per gram or less at the 25 micron mesh testing. Those are also looked at as potential products that can be used um, film and fiber application areas. And so the chart at the right, at the top, do indicate that there were three products that we looked at that we tested below that two bar per gram limit. Then we went on to test them for their suitability for film and fiber areas. So in this particular case, of those three, one, which was developed for plastics, was the most suitable for film applications. The other two were in that marginal area for film application areas. So it all goes hand in hand for developing the pigment for the end application areas. But as I've mentioned before, it's not to say that other grades of pigment may be appropriate for your application as well. So it gives you options to be able to choose the best product for your application area. And then carrying on from that film and fiber application is really to understand what the next level of performance is. And I would have to say that products that are required for fiber or film probably need the most, they have this most stringent requirements for that type of application area. So that's one area where we test and we develop products for what I call regular plastic grade, which in our indication, you'll see just a K behind the product code. But we also develop products specifically for the fiber and the film area, and those you'll see a designation of KF. And the requirements are very different. The test method is a finer micron mesh, a 10 micron mesh versus a 25. Still has that same specification of less than 2 bars per gram, but obviously the mesh size is much smaller. The other differences here are the test time. It's an 800-second test time versus a 300, and there's more pigment that has to pass in this particular test. So it's a much more stringent test method to go for fiber and film. So some examples of a regular grade versus a fiber film grade, pigment yellow 191. We start to see where that difference is with respect to that 10 micron mesh. The regular grade has a 3.7 bars per gram, where the fiber film grade it has 1 in there. So you start to see from a particle property perspective, we see a increase in surface area, which indicates that the particle size has been decreased in this particular product grade. We start to then some examples with respect to the film note rating. We see an improvement there with that fiber film grade. Another chemistry example is pigment red 170. Similar results here. The regular grade on that 10 micron mesh is a 4.8 bar per gram, but on the for the fiber film grade, it's a 1.3 bar per gram aspect of it. And again, here we see that surface area difference, indicating that is a particle size reduction to get that performance area. And here we see a more dramatic improvement with respect to film note rating. And the last example goes back to that pigment blue 15.3 area. A much more dramatic difference in a filter pressure value on that 10 micron mesh screen. But in this particular case, we see a decrease in surface area, indicating that the particle size is going up, but then that also tells me that the finishing techniques that we chose for this one resulted in a softer particle, so that it does disperse easier. And we see that result in that film area film note rating improvement as well. So there's different ways of getting to that improvement from a regular grade to a fiber film grade. Sometimes it is a particle size reduction, and in this particular case, it is a particle hardness reduction, making it softer, easier to disperse. And lastly, the last example area is in micas. So micas are used in all application areas, so it's important to understand what the possibilities are there and what it can do. So typically, the primary one I wanted to focus on here is in that chemical finishing area as far as surface treatment. And typically, we use surface treatments to help with the weatherability and durability aspects of that particular product and formulation. And that's what we have, the example that I have here. And so in this particular case, this formulation is actually a powder coating formulation where we are taking a look at the choice of the chemistry itself and how much is put upon that particular flake. What we're looking at here is outdoor accelerated weathering for a very fine mica, the 1 to 15 mica in here. So the blue, the difference in chemistry are by the color, and the amounts are by the amount of the darkness of the lines here. And what we see in this gloss retention area is that there is one or two formulations here that really do retain that gloss at an acceptable level in that 90 to 100% gloss retention zone that we're looking for. And then from a color retention aspect of it, the delta E, we see here that really there is only one formulation that passes the test for a delta E maximum of 5 over this 12-month period. In this particular case, 12 months of accelerated outdoor weathering is approximately equal to 12 years in Florida. So, I mean, this is a slide I use a lot, probably in almost every webinar. However, it's really important to understand that it's always going to be a balance of properties that you're going to get when you choose a pigment. So there's obviously a pigment chemistry choice, a finishing choice that result in that particular product's performance, but then it has to match up to your application chemistry and process to give the overall application performance. So when you're going through and developing your formulation attribute list, you're always going to make sure that you um, understand what your must wants and nice to haves are in that particular priority, so that we can match up and get as many of those your must as possible, some wants, and maybe even a nice to have or two in there. But being very diligent about understanding what those priorities are helps to choose the right product, not necessarily what it was originally developed for, but the right product. So next month, we will continue revisiting some older topics where we're going to take a look at high performance azo pigments. So that'll be our February webinar, always the last Tuesday of the month. And then in March, we will revisit quinacridone pigments as well. So stay tuned for those. You can reach out to any one of us, of course. We're all here to help answer your questions, get whatever your needs are, and to be able to address whatever issues or questions that you do have. I also would like to take the opportunity to introduce our newest member of our team here in the U.S. is Chris Patterson. He comes to us to take care of primarily the inks and special application areas. So we welcome him to our team. So another point of contact for everybody there. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have. And I do see one here that's asking the question is what kind of surface treatments on pearls micas are required to kill the photocatalytic behavior of anatase coatings? Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so anatase, silver micas are and the iridescent micas are coated with TiO2 to get that color. The thickness of that TiO2 coating depicts what end color that you will achieve. The thinnest of that TiO2 coating will be silver or silver white, depending on how you call it. And in a lot of cases, there are choices of using either rutile TiO2 or anatase TiO2 for that formulation. And the incoming TiO2 for that one, whether it's anatase or rutile, they themselves have a difference of performance aspect of that particular one. From trying to kill that photocatalytic behavior of TiO2 in general. TiO2, the rutile TiO2 is much better, and we use the coating in example that I used here. It is a chrome containing a surface treatment that is best suited for that one. However, there will be a difference to the negative side when you compare a rutile coating versus a anatase TiO2 silver mica. The anatase TiO2 will always be less durable than the rutile. The next question was, will any of the finishing steps, either mechanical or chemical, impact gloss for particular ink application areas? So the answer in general to that is yes. So you saw some of those examples in the presentation uh, already, and each of those product areas where we did have gloss, all those have very unique finishing techniques applied to that as a product. So definitely can be related to the choice of a finishing technique to get either the highest gloss that you're looking for in that particular application area. Okay, any other questions coming through?